Hey, Ron here from Military Images Magazine with a new episode of Life on the Civil War Research Trail. I like to tell folks when I begin a research project, I do the research backwards. I start with the photograph of a soldier or a sailor and then begin to do the research. And sometimes that research path is arduous as I'm plowing through various databases and searches to find any information at all about the individual that I'm researching. In this case, the soldier pictured here, Charles James Mills of the 2nd Massachusetts Infantry, was quite different. His image came with a book, and the book is right here. It is called Through Blood and Fire by Greg Coco. If you don't know Greg Coco, the late Greg Coco, he was a battlefield guide, a researcher extraordinaire, and he died a few years ago and is buried in Evergreen Cemetery. You can go visit his gravesite the next time you're in Gettysburg. Greg has written some tremendous books about Gettysburg, and this is one of, I think, an early one, 1982. You can tell by the retro-looking cover. And inside, Greg, as I mentioned, the consummate researcher, has pulled together all kinds of references about Charley Mills. Charley from Massachusetts lived a life of privilege. When the war started, he had just graduated from Harvard, and he joins I would call it the elite 2nd Massachusetts, made up of many wealthy sons of prominent families in the Boston area. Charley is wounded at the Battle of Antietam, a shot through both thighs. And you can see him here. He's posed with a cane. That cane is not for show. That's because he's recovering from his injuries. This image taken in 1863. At that point, his military service with the 2nd was over, so he went on to join the 56th Massachusetts and then later an aide to several generals. The last one was Andrew A. Humphries, the super talented corps commander in the Army of the Potomac. Charley came so close to surviving the war, and it's just so tragic that he was lost, suffering death at the Battle of Hatcher's Run in Virginia on March 31st, 1865. That's just 11 days. No, sorry, less than that, 9 days before the surrender of General Robert E. Lee of the Army of Northern Virginia to Lieutenant General Ulysses S. Grant at Appomattox Courthouse. So I'm looking at Greg's book and reading through all of the interesting information he collected, and there's 2 passages that stood out for me, and I want to share them with you because it gets to not only tragic loss, but the grief that was suffered. And I've got 2 accounts. The first one comes from Humphries' biography, which was written in 1924. So we're looking at almost 100 years ago, this biography was written. So I'm going to read you just a little bit here, which sets up the scene where Charley is with Humphries, right near Humphries and the staff when he suffers his death wound. So here's the first one, and then I'll save the second one for after that. So here we go. Quote, "The Rainey House stood near the southern end of a large open field where the Boynton Plank and Quaker roads came together. At the northern end of this field were the entrenched lines of the enemy in front of the White Oak Road, with batteries which had a clean sweep of this field. On the east and west ends of the fields were woods. The headquarters of the Corps, that's Humphreys' Corps, were near the southeastern end of the field, partly screened from the view of the enemy. The Corps commander, that's Humphreys, with his staff, flag, and orderlies mounted, quite a large group, was on the left of the Rainey House, waiting for a report from the right of the Corps. All were in plain view of the enemy, distant some 700 yards. On the morning of March 31st, 1865, the enemy were very sensitive to any inspection being made of their lines by any party, large or small. Some musketry firing was going on along the lines, the morning salutation to both parties. Suddenly, a gun of the enemy was fired, presumably at the staff, who, being directly in line of fire of that gun, saw the projectile in the air, saw it strike the ground, and bounding upwards, come with a thud into the staff. Passing very close to Humphries, who remained immovable, the missile struck Captain Mills on the left side below the ribs, who fell from his horse dead. The ball then passed through the neck of a horse ridden by Lieutenant D.P. Heap of the Corps of Engineers of the United States Army, now a colonel of the Second Corps. That animal fell dead to the ground, carrying with him the rider. Humphries was visibly affected by the death of Captain Mills. Wow, what an emotional moment. I'm trying to imagine the fear and the moment when the projectile fired by the enemy, they could actually see it coming towards them and hit the ground and bound towards them. There was no moment to move. It all happened so quickly. And by this account, Mills had no idea what was coming, or he at least saw the projectile, but had no idea that it was coming for him or would hit him. So that's the first account. The second account, as I mentioned earlier, is by Lieutenant Colonel Theodore Lyman. He's on the staff of Major General Meade, and he's close by. Not exactly with Humphreys' staff, but close enough to see. And here's his recollection. This is a letter he wrote to his family. He says, quote, "I recollect I turned just then and saw Charley Mills sitting on horseback near General Humphreys." So this account lines up with Humphreys' biography. Lyman continues, "He nodded and smiled at me." This is Charley Mills. "He nodded and smiled at me. Immediately after, General Meade rode to a rising ground a couple of 100 yards from the house, that's the Rainey House, while General Humphreys went a short distance to the front in the field. Almost at that instant, a round shot passed through Humphreys' staff and struck Mills in the side, and he fell dead from his horse. He was indeed an excellent and spirited young man and beloved by us all." Here's an aftermath moment that really stays with me. Here's Lyman, quote, "When I rode that evening to the hospital and saw the poor boy lying there on the ground, it made me think of Abbott a year ago." This is another staffer. "It's the same thing over and over again. And strange too, this is seeing a young man in full flush of robust health, and the next moment, nothing that we can make out but the broken machine that the soul once put into motion." Some stirring words from Lieutenant Colonel Theodore Lyman about Charley Mills, pictured here. So there's a couple of things going on here, aside from the emotion of the descriptions, the eyewitness accounts. What we also have here is a lesson on how folks like Greg Coco, the consummate researcher, pulls together all these different accounts. I'm just reading you a couple of passages that Coco included in his book. It's a thick book and it includes all the letters, all the references to Mills throughout his military service. And it speaks to the diligence and the passion of researchers like Coco, who go to the seemingly to the ends of the earth to track down this information. And you got to ask the question, why do they do it? Why do we do it? What is it about these soldiers and this particular time period in our history that makes us go to such lengths to find out more about them and to preserve their memories? Well, it's a hard question to answer, but if you're following this series every morning, you know that I'm doing it every day, and I'm endlessly fascinated with the journey to try to tell these stories and to preserve the history and keep it relevant for all of you. And I'm not alone. As I mentioned, a bunch of us continue to do this. So that's all I have for today. Take care, and we'll see you on the next episode.